So I'm Randy Picht again, from the executive director here from RJI, and I hope everybody survived last night and is recovered from battle decks and other things. So now we're going to talk to folks from the news industry and kind of get their perspective and some of their thoughts about where things are, some of the issues, and some of the opportunities. You know, it's interesting because I was talking to someone last night about this, is that in the news business now, many things, everything that we had taken for granted for decades is now up for grabs, and we have to think about everything. And going to the high school football game and taking photographs is now a big issue, and distributing our news is a big issue in terms of how it's getting out on Twitter, and so there's lots of different things that are on everybody's plate here, and archiving is on the list. So I think that's why we're having this conference, and I think that's it's another one of the things that for a long time newspapers just kind of sent the newspapers onto the shelf and kept them, and the library had them, and it was like everything's taken care of. And now lots of questions. So it's really good that we have everybody here, and hopefully we'll get some answers. So I'm going to just do real quick introductions here. This is Mark Wilson from Town News, which is a content management system company. He has 600 newspapers.
1,600.
1,600 newspapers around the country that use the content management system. Andy Waters is general manager from the Columbia Daily Tribune right here in Columbia. Austin Federa is from KBIA, the public radio station here in Columbia. Tom Warhover is from the Columbia Missourian and the Missouri School of Journalism here in Columbia. Bob Mong is from the Dallas Morning News, and Teri Hayt is from GateHouse in Ohio, right? Okay. So, and we also have via Skype Mizell Stewart from Scripps. Hi, Mizell. Can you hear us?
Good morning, everyone.
All right, see? And we got him just on one screen, so he's not like the Wizard of Oz up there. So, and he can see you guys, so anyway. All right, so let's, Bob, can I start with you? I just kind of, one of the issues that have come up is the idea about the value of the archives and the tension about, getting the attention that they need because they're a revenue source or because it's just the right thing to do to save all this content. So can you talk a little bit about how those conversations go at a major metropolitan newspaper?
Well, first of all, I think any journalist worth their salt has a great affinity for archivists. Archivists are our friends, as opposed to public information officers. So give me an archivist any day. Obviously, our people, if they're smart, they understand the efficacy of using archives, outside archives, and also our internal archives. So a year ago, we celebrated we memorialized the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination and its effects on the city. Buried in the DeGolyer archives at SMU was something none of us knew existed, which was a series of short biographies that reporters and editors who lived through the assassination and covered the assassination and the Oswald killing had written down at the time. It was so compelling, we did a book about it. We didn't even know it existed. So there's a lot out there we don't even know exists. And there's a lot in our internal archives that we don't know exists. So it's incredibly important to us. So, I mean, first and foremost, we recognize how important it is for us.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And Teri, can I ask you next? You've been thinking about kind of what Bob was saying about the value of the archives, and maybe diving into it a little bit. What have you found in terms of the condition or how things are going?
Well, I joined GateHouse Ohio a little over 2 years ago, and one of the things that I thought was an interesting project that was coming up, the Canton Repository will be 200 years old, 200 continuous years of publication next March. So we are obviously doing a great deal of mining of our archive and looking at what's available to us in print, and our bound volumes are not in good condition, what we have of them. We've been partnering with our local library system and looking at other things as well, community call-outs. We are the keepers of our community's history, all of us, and that is a huge responsibility for all of us. And we've all changed in the last year. I mean, it's innovation all the time. So it's not just about the print products we have that are 50 or 100 years old. It's about everything we've done in the last 15 years or more with digital, the online storytelling that we're doing all the time, and how are we holding on to that? It's kind of piecemeal. One of the things that, unfortunately, I'm going to go back to my newsroom and they're going to go away going, oh my God, she just went to a conference. She wants to do this now. Standard operating procedure. I mean, I want to look at some of our processes for how we're inputting information that needs to be in all of these pieces. The embedded metadata, are we following certain processes? I've got a feeling that the answer to my question is going to be 50-50. But I think every news organization understands the responsibility they have as the community's voice. I mean, our editorial pages are our community's conscience. I mean, how are we keeping all of this? And how are we able to get it back? This has been a marvelous conference for opening my eyes to a number of things.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things about the processes and the kind of the conscious decisions to take steps to save the content is important. I think also there's this, as you said, people are going to say, oh, now she's got this new idea, sort of getting everybody on the same page. And Mark, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of your experiences. And of course, you wrote that great post about the, not Buddy Holly, Bill Hay. Yeah, that's close. I don't know if you guys saw that, but Mark wrote a wonderful post leading up to this conference about the value of the archives when he worked for the Associated Press a long time ago. And but anyway, could you maybe talk a little bit about what you have seen from your perch, which is pretty interesting because you get to kind of see 1,600 newspapers and what they think about archives and where they are in the thought process.
Sure. First off, thank you to the Reynolds Journalism Institute and Randy and all the crew. It's really been a great conference, and I know you put a lot of resources in this. Our company started off actually out of the back shop of a weekly newspaper in Big Fork, Montana, and first we tried to be a wire service for weekly newspapers, and the web came along, and we started putting newspapers, mostly weeklies, up on the web. And a short time after we started doing this, our one programmer came and said, what do we do with the old content that's been put up? Should we kill this off after 30 days? And I said, well, it'd be kind of a crime to kill this content, so just keep it up there. So really for now, close to 20 years, we've been keeping everything that any one of our customers, we didn't have 1,600 the first day either, we had one. But we kept all the content up, and so we have an awful lot of data, and for most of our customers now use that a lot for their own internal archiving. We're not an archiving company, and it's always kind of concerned me that we have all this data. We have no, I mean, Andy's a customer. We haven't told him that we're going to keep this up for 300 years. But, you know, there's, what? Andy doesn't get the mic. But, you know, there's a need. We do have all of this data. We have a more sophisticated content management system where all the archival material is actually treated as an asset equal to the current content. And there's just a great need out there. I think one of the overriding issues we've seen is that most of the newspaper customers we have, and most of the newspapers in the country, have fewer and fewer resources, and when they cut their archivists, their librarians. The thought of maintaining this content is just not high with them because it's not necessarily a revenue stream. On what, you know, Bob said, they can make money, and I think that's a good example to tell people there are ways to make money. So, but there's data that needs to be saved, and we'd sure like to help do it.
Well, and also, why don't you just mention the what you did to try to encourage folks to save the data with the rates?
Well, we have a very good e-edition now that's built out of our content management system, and for a while, it was really my choice. We did not want to be in the archive business, so we actually had a kind of a high storage cost. But and so most of our customers were killing their e-editions out after 30 days. And then I thought, well, this is kind of a crime. So we cut our storage charges down by 3/4 to try to encourage our customers to keep their e-editions up long term.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So
I still don't know what we're going to do in 300 years.
So the idea that the programmer comes to you and says, well, you know, should we keep this for 30 days or 300 years? And basically you're sitting at your desk and saying, and you're gonna say something. You're gonna say 30 days, or you're gonna say 300.
The roots of that decision really came out of being I worked for 3 daily newspapers and 5 bureaus of the AP, and knowing what it is to have access as a reporter to instant data, searchable data, is so valuable to your newsrooms. And so it was really fairly easy once of course I did ask the programmer, well, is this going to cost us much? and he said, it shouldn't. And then over time, data storage has gone down. Now, we now have 2 data centers, one in New York and one in Chicago. We replicate the data back and forth. So all that kind of thing is expensive, time-consuming, has security issues. There's no doubt that it could be easier just to kind of ignore archives, but I think it would be a terrible crime to not save all that we can.
Yeah. Right, and I think everybody here probably agrees.
But this is a good crowd for that.
But that the fragility of it, sort of, one decision, one thought, let's just 30 days or whatever, and I guess some people think, probably nobody here, but that digital archives are very easy to save. You just copy everything over to a hard disk or whatever, and what's the big deal? But there are significant issues about that, and they are susceptible to things happening. I thought maybe Austin from KBIA, the radio station here, could talk a little bit about a recent experience you guys had with your archives.
Yeah, so all of our digital content, we tried to do the good thing. It's stored in 3 places. They're 3 separate systems. They're in 3 separate buildings. Sounds like a good plan, right? Except when it's not. So because we have over 100 students per term working in our newsroom, our computers are kind of open access model, where most of the file system is accessible from any of the terminals, because with so many different users, permission levels become very difficult to manage. There's some stuff that's sort of administrative, set aside, but we managed to get a very sophisticated piece of what's called ransomware onto our computer. So you're familiar with viruses and spyware. This is significantly worse than all of that. This goes in and encrypts all of your data and puts some links in there about where you can donate several $1,000s via Bitcoin to somewhere in Eastern Europe, and then they will possibly decrypt the data. There's no guarantee that that'll actually unlock it because the hacker has to go in and manually undo it. So this went from our primary system into our backup system, and due to a quirk in a design that wasn't fully functioning properly, the third stage of backup just wasn't operating for that week. So we lost only about 2 weeks, but we were really standing to lose just about everything. I will say this got through Microsoft Forefront. This got through our entire IT defense infrastructure at the University of Missouri. There's really no way around this other than to have backups that someone physically backs up every week or something like that, locks in a fireproof safe, and then gets it out every week and does it again. We thought we were well protected, and I mean, we're doing network storage, we're doing multiple locations, we're doing what everyone says you should do. We're way too small to afford one of those, like local defense systems like a Barracuda system or one of those. So we almost lost all of our digital content about 2 weeks ago. So,
Tom, you did a
Yes.
video for this conference and talking, it was about losing data, losing the archives. So can you maybe talk about what you've been doing since then, or how that kind of changed maybe how you approached archiving, if it did?
Well, sure. The
You know what, why don't you, maybe you should
yeah,
say what happened first.
The situation was we lost 1986 through 2002. We had the information in a cold room and on servers, and among the problems was that there was one guy who knew how the servers worked, and he died. He died. So, the guy that was patching this and patching this and patching it again is no longer with us, and then we lose the whole thing. We've since on all our systems become strong believers in redundancy, and we're increasingly moving to cloud-based systems, but I'm not convinced that we're even close to being where we need to be.
Okay, that's fair. Mizell, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. So yesterday, we had a wonderful presentation, a good news story about what happened at the former Scripps paper, the Rocky Mountain News. And I just wanted to get your perspective on kind of what Scripps is thinking. You guys sort of seems like you did the right thing every step of the way. So what is your take sort of on what we need to do in terms of saving content?
Well, the Rocky arrangement with the Denver Public Library really represents our view of archives, which is as legacy news companies, we are the repository of the community's history, in the same spirit that Bob and Teri talked about a few moments ago. And partnerships with libraries are really a critical part of our strategy. Most recently, we about 4 years ago cut a deal, an enterprise deal with Newsbank that provides for the digitization of our back issues. And so, if you those of you who come from a print background remember the bound volumes and the bound editions of paper newspapers, as well as the microfilm archives. When those are in microfilm format or in bound volumes, they're not accessible, they're not useful, they really don't provide the level of community service that we want to provide. The other part about physical archives is that they're really easy to forget. For example, they're really easy targets for folks who are looking for ways to reduce costs and to reduce stuff, and some people literally in the spirit of reducing clutter. And so if you can imagine a circumstance where, you know, all the file cabinets in a newspaper library end up out in the back of the building next to the dumpster, that has happened in a couple of our markets. And if not for, in a couple of cases, just really eagle-eyed citizens and the willingness of people at libraries to take on those collections, they would have been lost forever. So the Newsbank deal was all about looking at our back catalog, and as the community raises the funds to help defray the cost of digitizing that content, that content is digitized, and then those archives are made available in searchable digital form to the public. And we did the first deal when I was editor of the Scripps-owned Evansville Courier and Press. And so now the archives of that newspaper are available through the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library to the larger community. And so I think, first of all, it's really raising the awareness among media professionals and media leaders that the archives of a publication represent a community asset. You know, and as much as I want to figure out ways to monetize those archives, really the first thing to think about is, you know, how do we preserve that asset for the benefit of the community? And before you look at clearing out space, figure out where you can clear that collection, you know, for the benefit of the community.
Okay, thanks, Mizell. So one of the things we have talked about, and Mizell just mentioned about his partnership with Newsbank, is that, and I think Clifford Lynch brought this up at the beginning, which was, you know, there's multiple ways to do this and multiple organizations that need to be involved, but we have to make sure that we're doing that the right way. And I think I'm going to ask Andy to talk about that, because when he first took over as general manager and started looking around at some of the agreements that had been in place for a long, long time, he was surprised, and when he told me, I was surprised at kind of how some of these things are set up. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found and what you're doing now?
Well, we have various licensing agreements with various aggregators, news aggregators, like most newspapers do. And I think these were agreements that we got into years ago, long before we had much of an online audience at all and really knew what to do with our digital content. And these agreements, that at least in our experience, were not very good agreements. They really gave the licensee complete access to do anything with our content that they wanted. And in return, we got very, very little, maybe a couple $1,000s a year. And, you know, in reviewing these contracts, when I got in a position to, you know, become aware of them, I just realized that they were giving a lot more value to these aggregators than we were getting in return. So I got out of all of them. And I know that makes some librarians in the room cringe, because those databases you depend on probably for a complete news report. And but really, in our case, I felt like we were being taken advantage of. And it was a struggle, frankly, in some cases to get out of these agreements. They'd been written in ways that benefited these aggregators at our expense. So that's our experience with some of these database services, and I'm happy to say that we no longer are participating in that. I think we have a lot to offer our community, and we are in the business of trying to provide a news report, and we have to be able to monetize that and have a business model around it. And really, I saw these agreements that we were in a small but significant way undermining our ability to do that, especially when we were going to a model where we're going to be charging for content online. And that was really the tipping point. It just didn't make sense to me to have open access to all of our content in our community for anybody, essentially free of charge when we were trying to charge for it because we have to ourselves. We want to be the source of that information and not somebody else. So that was really what drove this.
So what are you guys doing now? Just what you had been doing, except cut out the aggregators, so you give papers to the library and stuff like that?
Right. I mean, we never saw these aggregators as a preservation mechanism. We've been preserving our content all along. We've always done bound volumes. We still do. We've always done microfilm. We still do. I'm learning now that we may be the smallest paper in America that still has a librarian on staff. Does that make me the smartest person in the room or the dumbest? I don't know. But that person is engaged in, and she's spends a lot of her time dealing with DVDs now. We're archiving our digital content, and that's a whole nother, can of worms, ball of string. How do we deal with this massive mountain? It's growing every single day of digital content. And how do we know that we're preserving it in a way that's going to be useful years from now? And how do we have access to it? How do we have confidence that the data that we're storing and that we're restoring, because we know that physical media is going to wear out and we need to keep it fresh, is not corrupted? We don't really look at every piece of data we have, so we may be saving corrupted data over and over. So these are some of the questions that we wrestle with, and really is the reason why I'm interested in conferences like this, to try to get a handle on what are the best practices, what should we be doing with our content, and how should we proceed.
Okay. Bob, what's the library situation like at the morning news?
It's good. We have a strong research librarian who would have been here had she not become ill recently. And we have a photo archivist and librarian, and they work very closely together. We really don't have any excuses, I think, not to do it right. I mean, we have zero debt. We have a lot of money on our balance sheet, and we've worked hard to get to that place. We're also the oldest continuous business in the state of Texas. We date back to when Texas was a republic. And the people who founded the Dallas Morning News, the great-great-grandson is my boss and the CEO of the company. And so we have a strong sense of history. We also have obviously, if you want to survive, you have to have a healthy respect for what's coming and where you are now. And we have found, frankly, that strong collaborations with libraries, librarians, with academic institutions. We have lots of partnerships because we feel we can help each other out. We have things that we can offer them, and they have a lot to offer us. And it's not by chance that I'm here with Martin Halbert and Dorothy Bland from UNT, because Martin and I have been talking about this subject for several years. And so I'm hoping that we come out of this and there can be, some kind of pilot we can do together. We've all kind of got a compact on that. So again, I think you have to be humble about this, because as confident as we are that our infrastructure is sound, there have been some glitches that we face that, are unnerving. And at one point, we outsourced our IT to IBM, and it was the worst mistake we ever made. And thank God we've taken it back and have more control over it. But, I think partnerships, we have a great relationship with the Friends of the Dallas Public Library. It's been good for the library because, they provided us with a lot of inside information about, how Dallas stacked up with other cities and cost per citizen, cost per capita supporting public libraries, and it's sort of a terrible situation in Dallas. I think we're last or next to last in the country, and so that allowed our editorial page to be an advocate for the city spending more, which is ironic because a longtime city manager got her start in the library system. She's no longer the city manager, but and I think as a result of our advocacy, all of a sudden hours were added this year, the budget was increased, and they took it away from a couple of areas that frankly were over-indexing if you compare Dallas with other cities. So libraries are important, we recognize that, and we think collaboration is important.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Hey, Randy.
Yep.
Bob raises a great point, and that is, there are a number of organizations and institutions in any given community that are kindred spirits with us in terms of local history, and the potential for university partnerships in addition to public libraries can't be underestimated.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point to amplify. So, Teri, you talked about Canton and 200-year anniversary. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about the process of, as you guys were trying to decide what to do, how much revenue was mentioned in terms of that being the driving factor or not?
It didn't, I'm sure there's a revenue number attached. I'm not aware of what it is. But one of the first things that we did as an executive management team, the publisher and the general managers of two of the smaller papers I see, we reached out to a local museum as well as the Stark County Library. The Massillon Museum archivists and the Stark County librarians came in and looked at what we had, and they didn't shake their heads. They were very polite about the whole thing, but they did give us kind of an assessment of where they saw, we needed some help in certain areas. We have a negative archive that's literally sitting in negative files. How we would go about looking at that in the next 8 months, and how we would narrow that down. They were very helpful. Bound volumes are bound volumes. As I mentioned to a few people, a number of our bound volumes were beyond repair. We have an agreement with Newsbank. They have historical pages going all the way back to 1815, and we are in the process of basically going through, several of us, and finding front pages that have been historic, and we'll be publishing one every year during our anniversary year. But we don't have a librarian, and I'm with Bob. I would love a librarian and have fewer of these public information officials, but that's the way it is. But one of my columnists who's been there for years, he stepped up and he said, I want to be part of this. I know things, and Gary Brown has just been an incredible help to us. He goes in there, he's finding things for us all the time, but it is very slow and it's very piecemeal because it isn't all electronic. We will get there eventually. The company I work for is very aware of all the issues for all their newspapers and is reaching out and doing various partnerships. But, part of this is our internal celebration and making sure that we've done as best we can to kind of be good caretakers, which I would say I'd give us maybe a 50% right now. We'll be much better in the next few months. But it's also about reaching out to the community. And our communities have a great deal of our history. They have a first edition, or they have that, they have those moments. They've kept them. It's a very print-centric audience in my particular community. But then we have a number of universities in our area that have also been, looking at us, and we're going to be talking partnerships everywhere we can, because it's about the relationships you make within your communities, and then your companies and what they see going forward for what's best for your particular property, but the rest of the people that are in your group as well. So it's been an education.
I just wanted to follow up on a point that Andy made earlier. There are a lot of publishers who feel they've been kind of abused by some of the agreements that they've done in trading content, and they've had all the expense of creating this big news report, and then they've found some of the agreements that have been made in the past have not protected the news organization well enough. So as you try to figure out the collaboration, there's kind of a wall that you have to climb with a number of publishers who are going to feel like, well, this doesn't benefit us. We've created all this content. And I believe everything everyone said about the good of preserving this content. But we have to be careful, I think, if we're going to get the producers of the content to agree to share, to make sure that this is, this isn't something that is going to be for somebody else's financial benefit to the disadvantage of the producer.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that's something that needs some more research. And Mizell, I was actually going to ask you about that, kind of the view from the corporate suite about this. You talked about it, it's an important role that newspapers play in their communities. It's a great engagement tool, I think Teri was talking about as well. But what is, when you're doing the budget, how does that all work out in terms of how much money are we making, how much money are we spending, and what is that? What are those conversations like?
Well, the conversation is really about balancing the revenue opportunity with the expense of handling that internally. To the points that were raised about third-party content providers and agreements that advantage one side versus the other. We've had success in generating a significant amount of revenue through agreements that bundle all of our newspapers, and so Newsbank, the Newsbank agreement from our standpoint makes us money. And it allows us and enables us to make more money off of our archives than we would make by investing in those resources locally. The issue that we're focusing on more and more now is the born digital content. And how do we continue, we're monetizing our back catalog. The third parties that I run from, for example, are the folks who are prowling around trying to get access to our printed photo archives. And a lot of companies are coming out and offering to digitize photo collections in exchange for having access to those original prints and then the ability to go and resell them. The photo aspect is kind of a conundrum. The historic photo issue is a conundrum for me right now because I don't quite trust those people. But in dealing with our long-term and long-time partners, we've got to make a deal that makes sense for us financially, but also enables the partner to shoulder the expense of digitizing content and maintaining that content. So, Randy, I might be straying a little bit from the question, but as I look at the dollars and cents of it, it is, how can we streamline and automate the process of archiving to the best of our ability, so as to concentrate our resources on news gathering and the creation of original content. And so we look at our partnerships as a tool for us to be able to do that.
Okay, that's good. And I think that's sort of, what maybe one of the things that we could talk a little bit more about is what are some of the other things that you guys think are important in terms of, this is potentially one big partnership. Mizell mentioned a couple in there about having the right balance between expenses and revenue. Are there other things that you guys think are really important that we need to keep in mind as we start thinking about what we could do together in terms of a solution? Austin?
Sure. When I look at what we're doing with digital content, there's always a distinction between electronic content and digital content, which is important, right? So if you have your archives digitized and they're on DVDs and they're locked up safe in a back room, is that any good, right? From a utilization standpoint, that's not content that you can process. It's not content you can search or access or interact with in any meaningful way. So when we're dealing with modern stories that come up, there are oftentimes archival work that is directly related to that. So maybe original reports that now something new has come out on. How do we process that in a digital fashion to alert modern day editors who weren't around maybe 20 years ago when that content was created? How are they then able to utilize that to monetize that now in publishing? Harper's does a decent job of this. They have an archives column that they run in every issue. There's a few other places that do it. And in digital space, we're used to this whole related content field. So in our CMS, which is based on Drupal and NPR has developed it themselves, you get related content fields that fill in. Most CMSs have that. Where is that approach being taken in archiving? And how can we do that in a processed way, especially in a small station where we don't have a librarian, but maybe we can make this accessible in a system? Even within our digital content, we have these raw audio files, we have scripts, we have other assets associated with it. These all exist in folders and they're all very well categorized, but searching them is still a very arduous process. If you're using the Microsoft search, for example, that's not a very powerful feature to go into it. And how are we building these systems to deploy this content in a new framework? We in public media don't really think of monetization the same way because we're not making money on each individual article, but we really do at the end of the year when people choose to donate or not, that's part of what they're looking at is, do we have added value this year? Are we willing to give more money? And that's how we have to look at it. So there's that private archive and then there's the public archive. And in many times at a commercial paper or enterprise, you don't want to set the whole archive public, but how do you then interact with it in a way to generate revenue or at least generate interest?
Okay. And Mark, are you doing anything in terms of trying to increase access, or you're just...
It's not our content, not my company's content, it's Andy's content. All we're doing is preserving it for them, whether he knows it or not. He knows he is, but most of our customers don't really understand that we've actually saved all this data, all this content, but we have no rights to it. So, we would like to, figure out a way to have some standardization that might be usable in the future. Because, again, we made this decision one time, well, we'll just keep it. But we didn't maybe keep it in the best format, and maybe we can, if it needs to be in a better format down the road, it's one of the reasons I'm here, that we would be happy to, move in that direction. We would like to work with people like Andy is what do they want to do with it? We've had quite a few publishers who've tried to, sell their archives online, and it just, hasn't amounted to much. The biggest tool it's been is for the newsrooms just to have their own archives absent a librarian. I think Andy's probably one of our 1,600, we're probably, out of all our customers, we probably have 10 papers with actual librarian. And actually, I didn't know that you had one. So you're probably the smallest paper that we have that has a librarian. And so otherwise, it's kind of our content management system that is the librarian for a lot of folks, and the archives. But I'm looking for ideas. We're not an archive company. We don't try to make money on archives. It's not our content. It's Andy's content, all the customers' content. If there's something that we can do to facilitate, we're happy to do so.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I do think that it would be of value to everybody, including the publishers, if there was an institutional solution to this. And there used to be. I think it used to be the local public library's job, at least in communities that were big enough to handle this, to be kind of the repository of the bound volumes. And I don't know what's happened, in the rest of the world. In our community, we had, that was where our bound volumes were. We didn't have them in our company, in our building, and that went along fine. And then the library decided to do a renovation, and space became an issue. And they contacted me and said, "Hey, we've got all these bound volumes, and we can't keep them anymore. So, do you want them, or do you want us to throw them away?" And we said, "No, we want them." And they were great to work with. They brought them over, and they really helped us through that process. But now they're in our building, and I would submit that they're not safer there. I mean, I'm doing my best to to take care of them, because I really believe it's important. And I have a passion that this is history. And this is a community trust, and we're going to spend money on a librarian for as long as it takes to make sure that we're preserving that. I think it's a little bit different for us because we're an independent family-owned newspaper. We probably have a little bit more of a connection to the community than a chain might. And these decisions are not being made in the local communities oftentimes. But in our case, we're spending resources on trying to preserve this stuff, but we need some help. And, especially when it comes to digital content. And, so we're not opposed to the idea of turning our content over to somebody else for safekeeping. It does get tricky when you're talking about digital content, because, there's access to that there never was for, print media or microfilm. We were perfectly fine with having it to the library, and, anybody could go to the library and, have access to it. It's a whole nother ball of wax when you're talking about the library then giving access to the public online, because that's what we do too. And, so there's a lot of issues involved there, but I don't think that, the publishers to generalize here, are resisting the idea that, there may be a way to create a partnership that benefits everybody. Because in the end of the day, we just want our content preserved, at least, most of us do, I think, for humanity.
Yes, yesterday during the case study on Denver, the part that I really honed in on most was just how difficult it is still to extract that information, okay, and make it usable to anyone, and so my plea is that we specifically address how do you keep an archive alive. It's not enough to just keep it. So we've been talking about a new system, and that's been one failure after another. But one of the problems has been transfer data from one CMS to another CMS. And at one point, the discussion was, well, we'll just type it all back in. I didn't find that to be an acceptable answer. But those are some of the real practical things that are impeding us being able to save digital, and more than half of our content now is digital only. So we preserve the pages, but the pages aren't enough.
One of the things that we've seen is, you can have your bound volumes, but unless you're keeping them in basically archival, library, cold storage, they will disintegrate. So, a lot is lost when that happens. When we started down the digital road in 2002, we were told, these are the things you need to be saving your content to as much. Well, when the Maslin Museum came in, and they said, well, show us your DVDs and everything else, and then they just looked at me and they said, oh, really? No, your storage has already deteriorated if these have been on this for more than 10 years. So, okay, fine. So now we have to get it and transfer it and find out how much of it we can save off of DVDs that were state-of-the-art, years ago, that are not state-of-the-art now. And it's keeping up with that. So I mentioned to a few people here yesterday that at least you guys have made me smarter about the questions I need to be asking. Thank you very much, but you've also scared the heck out of me.
Right. Well, and updating the DVDs costs money, so there's all the expenses involved. So, Mizell, let me ask you, who do you think should take the lead in this? The content creators or the folks that want to protect and provide access?
Well, again, Randy and folks, there's always a pay-to-play piece of this. And, so the content creators, particularly in the newspaper space, are to say that we are resource constrained is an understatement. Again, that's where from our standpoint, a partnership makes sense where we work with other partners and either from a community standpoint in the case of local libraries and universities for the back catalog, and then companies such as Newsbank for current content. And we've begun now to archive our born digital content that never sees print. We're still trying to figure out a solution for video, but text continues to be archived wherever generated. Listening to this conversation, however, the part that of this that is most fascinating to me is with the rise of cloud storage and the relatively inexpensive cost of storage these days. I do find myself wondering whether partnerships that include perhaps the Internet Archive, the Library of Congress, are there ways to create for lack of a better description, a repository where local media organizations can have a locker, a virtual locker or a vault with which to transfer a lot of this content. And I think search algorithms are becoming a bit more sophisticated when it comes to finding out more, being able to search various types of content in a variety of different databases at the same time. But it seems to me that there needs to be some collaboration that is focused on where it goes, what goes in it, and who should have access to it.
Yeah, that's a good summary. I think that's what we hope to do, right? So, I guess we have about 20 minutes, and I wanted to make sure that you guys could ask some questions since everybody's here from one particular sector. So, why don't we see if anybody has any questions for these guys? You can just throw out a general question, or if you have a specific question.
It seems to me one of the challenges of the transforming of the data, moving it between systems, making it more portable, is that we just can't seem to agree on data schemas for really basic stuff that everybody uses in all their software. Like, why is it that there isn't why is it that there isn't a data standard for a news story that every one of these database backends uses, and that it's just like there, and then moving stuff from one to the other would be much easier? What prevents that from happening? Is it bad vendors? Is it we don't ask for it? What the hell?
Yeah, what the hell? I'd agree.
Well, we have a vendor. We do. We should hear from Mark on this. Where's the standards, Mark?
Yeah. Well, hey, let me jump
You know,
in. Let me jump
I
in
will-
real quick. If I can, let me jump in real quick. From my standpoint, at a corporate level, I don't see that it is as much of an issue in terms of standard, because most of our current content management systems are XML based. The challenge is you have different, and this is not to throw the vendors under the bus here, but one of the things that we've encountered are literally vendor X will have their own version of XML, and vendor Y will have their version of XML. And I'm going, well, wait a minute, and people will raise this stuff to me, and I'll go, wait a minute, I'm still a digital immigrant. I thought XML was XML. What do you mean you get to create one flavor or another? I think the other aspect of this too is content management systems that don't always provide that backdoor for content to be exported, and that I find to be really the fault of the people who built the system, where content, and we went through a CMS change on our digital platforms earlier this year, and a significant amount of born digital content in all of our markets was lost because of just simply the amount of time it would take, because every piece of content had to be exported one by one by one by one by one. And to say that wasn't going to happen, it wasn't going to happen. And so I think the data schema is one aspect of it, but I think the architecture of the systems that we're investing in is another element.
Andy wanted the mic.
I'm trying to give it to you for. I'm happy to say that we have hacked into our CMS and figured out how to get the data out. I'm not kidding, but no, I appreciate what Mark's doing. For us, it was a matter of of having control and possession of our content. So so what we're doing now, we're going to go in there and grab all our content and store it, and our main archive for the past 5 years at least is Mark's database, his server, and we don't have it on site. So that makes me a little nervous. I trust Mark, and he's been a great vendor, despite what everybody else in this room says. Just kidding. But I feel more comfortable if I had that same data on my server, so that if we needed to at some point in the future, we could have it. It's in terms of standards and compatibility of data, it's a big issue going forward. It's a huge issue going backward. Right now, we have everything that we've produced since 2009 in our town news database. But everything before that, we have in a mishmash of all different kinds of HTML files and ASP files, and just different types of web pages that we've saved over the years from the early websites that we created. We didn't know what we were doing. Nobody knew what they were doing, and there's all these different naming conventions, and it's a mess. And we showed that to Mark's company, and he said, "I don't want anything to do with that."
Well, we charge them.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That if money was no issue, this would not be a problem. We could hire a programmer to convert all these files, and we've done some of that. But it's a matter of resources. So how are we gonna get all that data in one place in a standard format that we can port to the next CMS if we ever have one? Probably won't. And not have this issue every time we make a change.
Well,
Do
yeah,
you,
and I
do
think
you currently have an exit? An export?
Oh, yes.
So if you go to a new system, Mark, does Andy have
Andy can have access to his content at any time. Okay, we move between. There's major vendors. We move between pretty easily between most of the vendors. Again, it's not our content. It is Andy's content. All the customers' content. Very few have the foresight of wanting to have it on site on their own. Very few even know that we have their content on their site, quite frankly, except their newsrooms use it. There are pretty decent standards, except going way back when somebody cobbled together their own website and then they said, "Oh, can you move your archives over?" And it just was before anybody really knew that, and there just weren't standards. So we had our standard. The NITF standards are pretty good. We can move data around. We have 4 programmers who do nothing but move archives into the systems. Or if we lose a customer, we help them move it. And there are actually some vendors who try to block access to somebody's archives, but that's just kind of immoral. So it's not that hard anymore, but unless you have some really old content, and obviously we've had people want us to move microfilm into, and we can't do it. So the typing solution sometimes is all you can do for that.
Let me clarify something real quick, Randy. I don't want to make too much light of this. I mean, Mark in Town News has been a great vendor. Absolutely, if we ever needed to move, the data would be there and it'd be, easy to access. It belongs to us and they give it to us. What we've been wanting to do and what we've figured out, I think, how to do is create an ongoing daily, if not more frequently, archive of that content. Just for my own peace of mind as much as anything else, just so that I don't have to rely on somebody else for safekeeping of our history in the making.
We feel like we're an accidental archivist, okay? And we have a bunch of our customers who maybe not care, and we have stored this on their behalf. And they don't know it and may not care, and it's kind of concerning to me. And I would hope that there's associations and organizations like yours that will help protect us long term, because we're not an archiving company. Doggone it, let me out of it.
Nope, sorry. But I think that's a good point, and not to put the cart before the horse, but I think helping folks with a standard and, setting something going forward. Going back, I understand, but we don't want to, compound the problem by everybody still doing everything they used to do is a really good point, and something that this group could work toward, I think. So, Dorothy?
I think standards are really important, and resources, I think, are some of the missing links here, because I know the Missourian went digital first. How many years ago? 5?
Oh, longer than that.
Okay. Some of your best content that we need to pull out is video. And so we're still archiving just flat PDFs, which is yesterday. We must be thinking about archiving XML so that people can data mine it, because journalists are data journalists now. And so we need to be thinking about, how can we afford to do this? We know what we need to do, we just can't afford it. So it's resources, it's standardization, and Newsbank is great, but we need to hold ProQuest and Newsbank's feet to the fire to say that do preservation and also do something other than ASCII. That is not as important as it used to be. We need to have the full value of these wonderful news websites and mobile sites that we have now that we all expect, not when we go back and just see an old ASCII file. It doesn't have, it just doesn't have the information that we have when we go directly to a website now, digital website.
Yes, that's a good point. Jim?
I understand that what you're trying to deal with is what you have published that is born digital. But I would like to push the envelope on this. Historians are not interested in interviews that are polished. They're interested in the raw footage. Likewise, it's more interesting to look at the outtakes that your photographers produced. Those tell more of a story. And so what I would encourage you to do is not look at what you have published that's born digital, but rather the rest of your digitized files that you have. It's more interesting for a historian to find out why you decided to endorse a candidate rather than another candidate. What were your deliberations during your editorial board meetings? Why did you choose to approach a story in one fashion rather than another? And that at the end of the day, most of your emails document your institution's history. And that's a huge problem, not only for the world of journalism, but for businesses, for universities, and so on, is that our history now is embedded in emails that are fleeting.
Yeah, I think here at the university, it's up to each user how long they want to keep emails. There's not a, you can keep it for a year, 10 years, whatever you want. There's a record retention on email. Oh, sorry, okay. That's just my personal inbox, right? Yeah.
As valuable as the raw content is, I think it will be an uphill battle for us to archive that kind of information. It just opens us up for subpoenas of reporters' notes. And as as we know, the state of shield law right now, that we're facing enough of a challenge in archiving the finished product, and so that's really going to be the focal point for certainly for us. I think a better way to look at this is archiving what I would describe as a public-facing and external layer of content that supports the community and that keeping of community history, and then an internal facing archive that allows our journalists to do their jobs better and more efficiently. But I think it's going to be a hard sell particularly for media companies, just given the number of subpoenas that we get when we have a photojournalist out taking capturing images of an accident scene, and it's a trip to court every single time that somebody wants access to our unpublished images. And so we would view that as creating an opportunity for folks to see us as their investigators, or in extreme circumstances, an arm of law enforcement if we routinely archive that level of information.
We do have a lot of newspapers now who publish many more photos, than the one or two they would put in print. So, and they, can resell them, so they will put many more. I'm sure all the papers here are putting up photos online that they don't put in print. We also allow publishers, if they wish, to have a back door to add data to their system, because it's their archives, that's unpublished content. Not too many of them do that, but they're welcome to do so.
Sorry, Randy, over here. One of my frustrations with these sorts of conversations is that you end up either talking about one end of this process or the other end of the process, right? And so I think Jim's point's really insightful as to, like, what do historians care about? They care about, ultimately, one of the things that reporters care about when they're recovering other agencies, or other groups, which is what are the documents or what are the materials that are actually sort of indicative of the process that actually takes place, right? I mean, ultimately, we're all doing work that has to, reporters are doing something on a daily basis, and they have to have a workflow and a process that allows them to share materials and talk with others. And ultimately, I mean, it's understandable that when we talk about archiving, everybody ends up going to the CMS and what is the finished product of that you can then take and archive, right? And one of the sort of peculiar, I think it's totally understandable that we're talking about archiving the news product as opposed to the process, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who are building tools in order to try and help with reporters and doing investigative journalism and the like to keep and better utilize the source material that actually goes into the process of producing journalism. These two conversations seem to be very separate. I mean, even at the Dallas Morning News, I happen to know that they use a tool called Panda that investigative reporters and editors and the Knight Foundation, and actually RJI, I think, has helped support. And so, like, where does that loop actually get closed in terms of trying to connect these two communities? And this is, one of the sort of, you're talking about two different levels, right? How does the journalism get produced at the level of individual reporters versus what are the concerns of people dealing with the CMS or publishers on the other hand?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is a failure in workflow design, right? So you're conceiving of assets, process, and product as three separate components. They're one process in a chain that involves the same components in different incarcerations of it at multiple times. So what NPR has developed is they have something called NewsFlex, which is the system they've developed in-house where the assets, the story, the script, the photos, everything exists within a pretty simple Apache SQL database that's then tracked through this process. And then when they hit publish, that sends it out over the NPR API, and that's how it gets published to the web. That's how all these member stations can pick up that content and ingest it into their local sites as well. The system's clunky. It's still in process of being developed, but what you have there is you have the files that are, let's say like the reporter's notebook type thing. They're stored in one location, but then you have all this information about how we access it. Like, photography's been doing this for years, right? In Aperture, Lightroom, anything like that, you're not actually editing the raw file, you're just creating a bunch of instructions about how you change it to produce what you want. Video editing is getting there too. Audio editing's been doing this for a long time as well. If we switch our entire sort of workflow production model over to something like this, especially if you're looking at something that isn't dealing with video, the costs are not astronomical for doing something like this. We are very close to doing it in public radio, and we're broke in public radio. So, I mean, we can't even have advertisers for the most part. So this is something that I think we really just need to start looking at. What is the next generation of these systems? How does a CMS include not only a data export, but a database export that saves these assets in a way that they can be accessed later on? You run into tons of legacy issues, right? You can't open a WordPerfect file in Office 2013. That's just something you can't do. So we need to keep these systems up to sort of a minimum up-to-date level. But beyond that, I think we just need to think about how everything's designed. We work on templates in newsrooms, and we need to sort of shake up those templates a bit to make something that fits a digital modern production style.
Something that I'd like to observe is that, as Mark was talking about, he doesn't, I hope you don't represent your company as an archive. You're not an archive. And journalists, I think, that we've surveyed, they have a hard time understanding that backing something up is not archiving it. And we get confused about that. Backup is not sufficient. There's a whole number of ongoing activities that when we're talking about digital preservation, we need to validate the files, make sure they're not broken. Are they the right kind? Have they changed since the last time we checked them? You know, this thing goes on. I guess my question for anybody here, and maybe Mizell, is you were just talking about Newsbank. Are they representing themselves as an archive, as that sort of digital long-term archive? Because my thought is that ProQuest, Newsbank, LexisNexis, they are not, even though they may be perceived that way, they're not archives.
Under your definition, they are not. But in practical use, that is the way we use them.
And we are not, but in practical, a lot of our customers use us that way. But we are not an archive company.
Is that right?
With all the implications that you want to take on, I admire you, but it's not something that we want to be in.
When did you become an archive company?
So I'd like to be slightly presumptuous and note that with Edward's and Randy's curation of people on this panel, there's a remarkable opportunity that we have maybe to collaborate together to develop the first real model. And here's Mark, who's saying, I don't want to be an archivist, but I'm going to be because it needs to be done, and who represents 1,000+ small newspapers, and through Mark is willing to be adventurous in experimenting with new models. So there is a ton of different talent in this room. There's a ton of different talent and expertise in this room that might collaborate, each offering some of their bit of expertise to get this thing going, to get this idea going. And following through with Mark, that's I think the missing piece of that puzzle to get stuff started is a publisher with contact with lots of neat, small, want-to-be entrepreneurial publications who are having history pass them by, but a publisher who has the vision to go, this needs to be preserved. So being slightly presumptuous, this might be an opportunity for follow-on creation of this first model as a result from this conference.
Yes, I like that. So we'll just sign you up and everything's taken care of?
You're talking to Andy, right?
And Mizell, we're signing you up too, so don't smile too much.
I'm about to say we are, one of the challenges I think in all of this, and frankly, Scripps is dealing with this right now, is this time next year we're going to be a totally different company. With the spinoff of our newspaper division and the formation of Journal Media Group, and really something we haven't said here, and something that I think is really an issue for our industry, is a durable way of addressing this issue that can transcend issues of ownership.
Second, that we've actually had customers who've gone out of business and their archives are just floating around no place. Yeah, I think we could retrieve them, but nobody has asked for them. And
Well, thank God you're an archive company.
Can you type?
We're a little bit late, yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for participating. Thanks, Mizell. See you later.